First of all, this is a seminar actually sponsored by the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering and also Center for Urban Transition Research. It also sponsored by several UTCs housed at USF, including NISA, National Institute for Congestion Reduction, and also Center for Transition Environment and Community Health, and the TomNet, playing the new trick on the old models, TomNet. And by the way, my name is Yu Zhang, and I'm a professor in the CE department, as well as a faculty affiliate with Qatar and serving as a director for the NISA. And today, we're really glad to have our Assistant Secretary, Brad Carlson, with us. And I will give a brief introduction of our Assistant Secretary, Toppen. And as the Assistant Secretary for Strategic Development, Brad Sobin leads the statewide transportation planning, model development, research, and innovation for the Florida Department of Transportation. Brad has experience in both the public and the private sector and has worked in transportation planning and policy leadership positions at the local, state, and federal levels. This gives him a unique perspective working with a multitude of partners to deliver the mobility solutions. Now, at FDOT, Brad and his team actually shaped the statewide transportation policy framework through the Florida Transportation Plan and guide some of the state's most impactful transportation investments through the strategic intermodal system. His model group is strengthening a vision for an integrated multimodal transportation system by planning for and investing in transit, rail, seaports, aviation, and space. The Offices of Research and Innovation ensure Florida is employing cutting-edge practices to move people and goods. And Brad actually previously served as the Southeast Region Practice Lead for Transit and Planning at Michael Bacon International, Vice President of Long Range Planning and System Development at Jacksonville Transportation Authority, the Chief Planner at FDOT, and the Director of Planning and Department for the City of Jacksonville. And Brad has been a long-time resident of Florida with his wife and their two daughters. And he actually got a degree from Washington, got degrees from Washington and Lee University. So again, Brad, thank you so much for taking the time from your busy schedule and deliver this talk at the USF Transition Seminar. So if you like, you can go ahead and share the screen.
Well, I appreciate that. Thanks. What I'm going to do, I'm going to start out kind of with, because today I'm talking about the department's efforts to implement the IIJA. And I'm going to start with a little bit of overview of IIJA without the PowerPoint, and then I'll move into that because the PowerPoint's really about the implementation piece and kind of the department's vision. So appreciate the introduction. One of the things that I like to do is, and you know, in the introduction, you heard a little bit about my role. I like to kind of elaborate a little bit on that, just because I think it's helpful for folks to know a little bit about how we're structured at DOT. So we actually have 3 assistant secretaries, and 2 of them you can tell by their name what they do, by their title. One is the Assistant Secretary for Engineering and Operations, and they oversee engineering and operations. And they are really focused on developing projects and delivering them and making sure that our system is well maintained. And then you have the Assistant Secretary of Finance and Administration, who is focused on making sure that that we have the right funds in place and that we're utilizing a wide range and mix of funds available to the department to deliver our program, as well as the administrative side, which is things like human resources and organizational development and things like that. So strategic development is a little less obvious, but basically we handle statewide planning and the modal offices. And so statewide planning covers things such as the development of the Florida Transportation Plan, or the Strategic Intermodal System Plan, the SIS, you may hear about. And then we actually guide the programming of those statewide projects, and those are some of the bigger projects and strategic investments that, a lot of our work as the department is decentralized. We have 7 districts and the Turnpike, and they do a lot of work in terms of programming and working with the MPOs and identifying priorities and then delivering projects. So a lot of the work happens at the district level, but the SIS helps us at the state level kind of make sure that there is a sort of stitching together of the 7 districts in the Turnpike in terms of making sure that we're making investments that take a statewide perspective and truly move us forward. So it's a little bit of a balancing act. Now, on the modal side, we often hear talk about how as we need to have a multimodal transportation system, and oftentimes the Department of Transportation, the state DOTs are often viewed as the more of the I'd say departments of big roads, but the truth is we do a lot of work in supporting our partners in the modal side. So that's airports, seaports, transit, rail, freight, and spaceports. And what's unique about the modes is we often don't have a role in operating and maintain, but we do provide a lot of funding, technical assistance, and statewide planning to make sure that our modal systems work as in a statewide nature. So, for example, we have 15 deep water seaports, and it's helpful if our seaports are functioning in a manner that's coordinated, because oftentimes we're competing. We'll talk about supply chain in a little bit, but that's just a little bit about who I am and the place that I function within. We also do research too, and so the universities are a major partner in terms of our research efforts as well. So before I start the conversation about what we're doing to implement the IIJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, which was enacted last fall in November. This was actually an extension of the Federal Transportation Act. And for those of you who are familiar with how we fund transportation from the federal level, basically every 5 or 6 years, usually, and sometimes it's longer than that because how things work in Washington. Sometimes they don't get things done on time. They will reauthorize the Federal Surface Transportation Act. And so it's taken on different names along the way. When I started my career, I worked in Washington, and we passed the T-21, which was the extension of ICE-T. And then since then, there's been Safety Lou, MAP 21, FAST Act, and various iterations of the Surface Transportation Act. And basically, what that does is it sets a framework for the allocation and use of the federal funds that are generated through largely the federal gas tax, but there are some other funding sources involved in that. So this new bill, which was broader than just an authorization of the Surface Transportation Act, but it included within it that extension. So it was a bigger infrastructure bill that also included the transportation authorization. So in some ways, it wasn't new money. It was sort of an extension of existing money that was available to the state. So we'd already programmed some of the dollars that we anticipated, but there was a significant increase in funding in that bill to the tune of basically about $3.5 billion over 5 years, and so we'll get 13.5 billion at DOT, and then the state as a whole will get about 16.5 billion. That's just the formula dollars. Something that was significant out of the reauthorization is that, and if you were to kind of look back from the time we went from ICE-T to T-21 to the Safety Lou and et cetera, each successive federal bill, there was a trend, and that trend was to allow more of the decisions to be made at the state and state level in terms of the programming, but basing it on a bottom-up planning process through the MPOs, so that there was sort of this bottom-up, top-down building of a program, but it was at the state level. And fewer decisions were made in Washington. There were fewer programs. So the idea was, over time, what happens is somebody has an idea, they want to have a focus on a certain area, so they create a new program. And what that does is it sort of fragments the funding and it makes it very difficult to build a program. And so over time, they were trying to streamline. So you saw fewer programs, but more eligibilities within those programs. A significant change happened in this bill because they added new programs, both formula programs and discretionary programs. So I'll talk a little bit, when we talk about the implementation, I'll talk about those. And just to give you an example, there used to be before this bill, there were 13 competitive grant programs at the federal level. They're now 34. And in fact, with the recently enacted bill on climate bill, there's actually now another 6. So there's 40 programs that we compete for funding under. And then we also saw new programs such as the carbon reduction program, the Protect Resiliency program, the National Electric Vehicle Formula program, as well as the Bridge Formula program. So those are dollars that come to us by formula that we allocate. The rest we have to compete for, that are the new programs. So with that, I'm going to hop into and share my screen on the presentation, if I can make this work. All right. So, can everybody see that okay? Are we good?
Yes.
Great. So, this is both going to be a conversation about what we're doing to actually implement the IIJA, but also to what some of our focus areas are. So one of those is embracing communities. And so and this is really important because one of the things that is important to consider within the state of Florida, and it's true to some extent in other states, but in Florida, it's really the case, is that we have just this vast diversity of places throughout the state and unique communities that have very different demands. And you think about Northwest Florida versus Southeast Florida, the Panhandle versus Miami. I mean, they couldn't be more different, and their needs couldn't be more different. So as we look to shape our program and address the needs of our state, we have to really be focused on our communities. And so we talk a lot about community-centric planning. How do we build infrastructure that addresses and not only addresses but embraces the character of our various communities? And it calls for us to do a higher level of community engagement, be aware of and try to reflect the visions for those communities, and then also really think about how we are a partner in shaping the character. Our assets in and of themselves, our investments shape their communities, and we need to be reflective of what their desires are and their needs and where they want to go as community. The other thing that is particularly important to think about is, is this working? Come on. There we go. Is that we are growing fast. And we're growing fast and not in a uniform way. So we tend to think out, we project out and say, well, we're going to have, 2 to 3% growth. And in some communities, that's what happens. In some places, the growth becomes exponential. And, you have areas in like Osceola County and St. Johns County, of close to 50% growth over the last 10 years. And if you're a rural county, it's tough to deal with that, but then also your base is low. So it might be not like the total number, but is that great? But when you look at Osceola and St. John's, they already had a lot of people and they are growing super fast. And so really the challenge is when you're building a program and planning out 20 years, how do you respond to the fact that these changes happen really quickly? And so we need to be cognizant of the fact that maybe the things that are in our plans, that we put in our plans, and they've kind of built, been in a long range plan and ultimately get into a work program, that by the time we're ready to deliver those projects, the needs may have changed. And so the nature of that project needs to reflect the current environment. And some of our priorities need to change. So that's something that, as we look to the future, um, we know we have to be more nimble, we have to be agile, and we have to think about scenarios. Uh, and I'll talk a little bit about technology in the future, uh, but technologies are the same way. You think about how fast technology changes. Technology affect the way we can deliver mobility, and as these new technologies like connected and automated vehicles emerge, advanced air mobility and air taxis and shared mobility solutions. They all change the way we need to think about transportation, and we need to be more. We need to think about the scenarios for development that are going to affect how we deliver and plan for our system. Um, One of the other areas that is of particular concern right now is the project delivery challenges that we face within just the nature of getting projects out. Not only is the high rate of growth an issue, but the project costs are going up. We do have a lot more funding available to us. Part of that's the federal funding. Part of it's because our economy is strong and our revenues are better. But at the same time, we're seeing growth in the consumer price index, and we're seeing up to 8% growth at times, over 8%. And and sometimes in the construction space, especially when there's things like you're competing against housing investments and development of new communities, uh, that competes for the availability of work that's out there. So, as places like the villages are going up at a rapid pace, we're at the same time trying to figure out how to address the road challenges, and we're competing for available resources. So there's that issue. Then there's also just the reality of workforce. We've talked about the Great Resignation, the quiet quitting, and low unemployment. Simply finding people to work and keeping good talent is tough. It affects us a lot of times on the front line with folks like maintenance workers and those that are delivering the program, but it also is tough to sometimes compete to keep those that are leading projects and leading people. And frankly, sometimes we lose in at the department in competing with the local governments and counties, because we're all competing for the same folks, and sometimes they pay a little better. So we are working on that, and we have a program to address some of the challenges. We've been working. The legislature gave us some authority to help uh, uh, train, test, and license commercial driver's licenses candidates. So that helps us. And that's a big issue for us is just having folks with CDLs, and it's a big issue for other transportation sectors like transit. Um, you look out and you think, our partners at seaports are struggling now. Simply, it's areas like having crane operators, and folks are competing in Jacksonville with Savannah for those employees. Um, and as we move forward, I mentioned technology once, I'll mention technology again. The nature of emerging technologies like electric vehicles, automated and connected vehicles, and shared mobility solutions are changing the demands on our workforce in terms of the skill sets that are available to help deliver our programs. Um, so uh, I want to talk about three kind of key focus areas that are also going to overlap very nicely with the our efforts to implement the IIJA. Uh, so three areas of focus are shown here: supply chain, resilience, and electric vehicles. And I'll get into these in a little bit more detail, but obviously on the supply chain side, supply chain is a critical element of our overall economy. I think we have we've kind of taken for granted the supply chain because it works well and it's sort of invisible to us, but it's not invisible when it breaks. And when there's a weak link in the chain, like we saw on the West Coast ports this past year, and we see things not showing up in at on the shore the shelves of our grocery stores and our you know and 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 then all of a sudden, we're seeing higher prices, and the reality that that supply chain breaks is really important. We are in a great position in Florida, though, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. The other thing is resilience. This is a hot topic, of course, and there's a new program in the IIJA. We've been working on resilience for a good bit to ensure our roadways and seaports, rail network, and air cargo facilities, continue to keep goods moving. So we talk about resilient supply chain, but we also talk about resilient infrastructure in general. And as we see more extreme weather events, flooding, nuisance flooding, and so forth, we're challenged to make sure that our infrastructure can adapt and remain in a working order, and that we develop our infrastructure in a way that addresses these changes. So that's a big issue. It's not new to us, and it's something we've been doing as part of our projects for some time now. Um, the the other thing, as we look to the future of technology, uh, the electric vehicles is an area that's gained a lot of attention lately. I'll talk about that a little bit more as we talk about the implementation of EDGE 2, because we do have funding available, but we've actually started planning for electric vehicles before this bill. We had the legislature, we had to report to the legislature on an EV master plan over a year ago. It helped us prepare for the opportunity that's come with these new funds. Um, so, I'm going to talk a little bit more. When we talk about supply chain, one of the things that I think is noteworthy, we do have the largest budget that we've had in the history of the department, at $12.6 billion, and so that's positive. Although I talked a little bit about the challenges on costs that are going to be an issue going forward. But part of that investment is ensuring that we are investing beyond our roads. So you can see here on this slide that we're making significant investments with our seaports, our aviation, transit, spaceports, and our freight and rail facilities. So we are truly focused on having a multimodal system, but also on the supply chain side, ensuring that that we are making those investments that sort of capitalize on the opportunity that's created by some of the shortcomings on the West Coast, where they couldn't handle the cargo coming in and out. Now, obviously, it's more than just the ports, and there's issues with drivers and containers and things like that. But the bottom line is for Florida is we're really well positioned in terms of being able to handle east-west and north-south trade lanes. And then we have a really strong foundation of road and rail and aviation infrastructure to connect to our seaports as well. So, one thing of note is that I mentioned that we have a $12.6 billion budget, and I talked about that's for one year. I talked about what the federal program is. We're really actually in a great place because 75% of our total budget is actually not federal funding, and we are one of the most aggressive states in the area of sort of self-help or maintenance of effort on our end, in terms of ensuring that we're making the investments at the state level to support our transportation network. Um, so each one of these modes, again, they play a critical role in our supply chain. As we look to the future, we're going to move beyond just thinking about the infrastructure. We're working with various partners to develop supply chain strategies. So it's beyond just trying to find the right project, but there are certain policies, there's programs, and there's partnerships that are needed to ensure supply chain resilience. Things like thinking about beyond just our seaports, but thinking about, or do we need inland ports or intermodal logistics centers? Are there policy issues that we need to advance so that we can ensure a pipeline of workforce to support our trucking industry and our rail industry as well? And so those are all important things that we'll be looking at as we move to the future. Um, Resilience. Uh, One of the things I did mention when I touched briefly on resilience is obviously we are a coastal state, and we are a low-lying coastal state in many areas. So the impacts of extreme weather, and hopefully we keep our fingers crossed, everybody be safe, because we've got our eyes peeled for this the potential for a storm coming and hitting us next week. But keep our fingers crossed and knock on wood that we aren't dealing with this in the coming week. But basically, we have been focused on resilience. We have a resilience policy that we had started back in 2020. We adopted this policy, and it defines our resilience as the ability to adapt to changing conditions, prepare for, withstand, and recover from disruptions. So largely, a lot of times that is extreme weather, but there's other disruptions. And as many of you know, we felt the disruption from COVID, and this is a kind of a good example where that is another example of resilience, where we need to be able to be agile, respond, and continue to work effectively in delivering transportation. I know for transit agencies and those in the passenger operations, like like cruise terminals and passenger rail and transit and aviation, there was a lot of talk about how do they become more resilient as we deal with something like the pandemic. Um, so we're already addressing the impacts of storms, flooding, and sea level rise. We're employing not only mitigation strategies, but we're looking at ways that we can better understand the vulnerabilities and the threats and prioritize investments that are risk tolerant. Um, we also include those things in our statewide planning efforts, whether it's the Florida Transportation Plan and the FTSS Policy Plan I mentioned before, but also our Freight Mobility and Trade Plan and our Transit Asset Management planning efforts. We are currently performing an agency-wide resilience assessment, which kind of what that does is mainstreams the concepts of resiliency in the organization, and it helps us develop more consistent and integrated practices and processes so that we are ensuring the resilience of our infrastructure, services, and operations. One of the things that we are also doing is developing a resilience action plan. Now, what's kind of interesting is the legislature, and we worked with the legislature and developed these requirements that we actually have a resilience action plan. At the same time, the federal government was passing, they were passing the IIJA, which within it required us to develop a resilience implementation plan. They are going to be closely aligned, and we're going to develop them in coordination. They have some different requirements, but it's kind of, I think, appropriate that we're going to have both the RIP and the RAP in our effort to deal with resiliency. Some of the goals within the resiliency action plan include strategies to enhance infrastructure and operational resilience, design changes, and also partnerships that are needed to advance resilience efforts. The We're going to be looking at how do we provide products for building on the strong foundation on resiliency. And some of those products include things like historic and current issue analysis, nuisance flooding, addressing the things in our policies and procedures, assessing the vulnerability of the state highway system, and looking at retrofit opportunities for existing infrastructure along the way. The So, it is a comprehensive approach that will, I think, better position us to address the unfortunate realities of extreme weather and events throughout that we see in Florida, especially. Um, on the area of electric vehicle charging, we we are this is an exciting area. I think what's really exciting is that this largely, while on the government side, there's a lot of conversation about how to facilitate and enable this transition to electric vehicles. There's a vast amount of investment that's happening on the private side in terms, when you start to see, the Fords and the Chevys and obviously Tesla's high, on the front end of it, but all the automakers are really making strong commitments and they're making major investments. But there's still an issue in terms of the ability to charge. And, we see our communities across the state embracing emerging technologies, whether it's connected and automated vehicles, or the electric vehicles. And we need the infrastructure to support it because there are issues with range anxiety and other things like that that will keep that may become hurdles to transition. And obviously, some of the challenges are very different depending on the area of the state. Rural areas will face very different challenges than urban areas, where you may find an equity issue in an urban area, and the rural areas just the availability of the infrastructure. Um, so we have the EV infrastructure deployment plan that was recently adopted by FHWA. So we're very pleased with that. I mentioned before that we had an EV master plan already. When the IIJA passed, they required us to develop the NEVI plan. So we were well positioned. We produced the NEVI plan. We submitted it on time, and it was approved just last week. So we're going to move towards the actual deployment of EV infrastructure. There were sort of three different implementation strategies that were highlighted within the our NEVI plan. And basically, as you can see on the slide, we're going to get about $200 million over the next 5 years to fund EV infrastructure. So we had the three areas that we focused on was planning for equitable, reliable, and future-proof system. And so what's really important is that we're supporting the investment of the latest technologies, the DC fast charging network, which is going to allow for a much quicker charge and ensure that it's an open system that everybody can access. The other thing that we are looking at is the build out of the system from an installation and operations standpoint. We want to make sure that we put those dollars out and solicit applications for the installation and long-term operations in a way that is an open, competitive process that ensures we get the most innovative, best value that meets the needs of the state. And the last thing that's really important is emergency preparedness and resiliency. Again, resiliency popping up, but obviously, there are some unique challenges that we're going to face in the state of Florida in terms of emergency evacuation and the resiliency of our infrastructure during those events. And so our system and our approach will directly address those things. One of the interesting things to note is that we were very aggressive in the last round of the designation of alternative fuel corridors, because we really wanted to make sure, because these funds have to be used on certain corridors, and and even in the first round, we're going to be limited a little bit because they have to be on the interstate, but ultimately you have to be on alternative fuel corridors. And so in this last round of designations, we actually increased our corridor designation by 58% over 4,000 miles. And I showed you a map of the other states and what they did, it would be pretty sparse. So we took a very different approach, and we were very aggressive in terms of expanding the potential network, especially knowing that there are certain areas that are going to really be stressed in an emergency evacuation scenario. So and the other thing that I think that where this will help is with our local partners, because under the IIJA, they provide formula funding that goes to the state, but they also provide $1.25 billion in funding for competitive grants. So our MPOs, local governments, and our tribes throughout the state are going to be positioning themselves to compete for these funds. And so we don't have the guidance on that yet, but we're positioning ourselves to compete and our local partners to compete for those funds. We do see this as a great opportunity, and we're going to be working closely with our local partners. So that is, I think, a good transition to the discussion of our federal discretionary grants. This is another area that is uniquely different about this current bill, is that it greatly expanded the a number of federal discretionary or competitive grants, and not only the number, but the sheer the amount in terms of funding. So as I mentioned, we went up to 34, just added another 6. The IAJA has almost $200 billion in competitive grant funding. And so there's some positives about this, but there's also some downsides. I'm always one of those that I prefer when we can build on our existing programs where we get priorities from the local governments and the MPOs, and we use those to build a program, and we have a reliable, deliverable work program. These competitive grants require a lot of work, and a lot of our partners don't have the capacity to compete. So we're in a position a lot of times where we're trying to work and help build capacity and partner. But it's hard to plan when you don't know what dollars you're going to get. And a lot of times, these just reflect the things that you haven't put in your program. So you question whether they're really priorities. But on the flip side, the positive thing about these discretionary grants is sometimes they'll fund the types of projects that wouldn't get funded traditionally. And as I mentioned before, we have sort of this issue of disruption and changing needs within communities. So the discretionary grants sometimes give us a chance to meet the needs of communities that might not be met typically through our regular planning process. So there's some positives and some negatives. Regardless of whether we like discretionary grants, there's $200 billion available, and we're going to do our part to ensure that we get our share in the state of Florida. Here you can see some of the grant applications that we've made so far. What's kind of interesting is that and a couple of these we actually recently got funded. We got funding for the 3 that are noted there: the Heights Mobility Corridor RAISE grant, the Florida East Coast Corridor Rail Safety Initiative, and Smart St. Augustine. We've got a couple others that we're still trying to now. About half of these have been funded, but some of them, well, and actually this is even obsolete. We've been awarded a couple that aren't even reflected on there yet. We actually just got the notice of award for the on-site signal improvements in South Florida. So we're continuing to compete for these funds. And the other thing that's kind of noteworthy is a lot of times these are a little bit geared towards local government, so we may not always be the best applicant. And we also will try. We'll submit an application 2 or 3 times because what we're finding now is that there's not a deep bench of these projects out there, and there's a lot of money. So the more times you put it in, the more feedback you get from the feds, the more you can build a better application, maybe build the partnerships around them, and start to be more competitive. This kind of gives you an idea of the process, and it really is. You see on the left side, it is continuous. A lot of times you don't get it the first time. You get the feedback, you strengthen your application, and then because there's so much funding available, sometimes you're not competing against as many projects the next go round. Some of the challenge we're facing is how do we build that pipeline of projects now as we're starting to see more and more of our projects get funded. We have to work harder to find really good competitive projects. I want to close out, and I want to leave a little bit of time for Q&A, but I always like to close out, and it's not that I like to, it's something, this is just something we do as an agency. we never have a presentation or a conversation where we don't talk about safety on our roadways. Um, you know, there are the 4 E's of safety. It's education, enforcement, engineering, and then, oh my gosh, I forgot the fourth one. But I don't want to belabor that, but the um, the one thing that's noteworthy in this is that we're always trying to create a safer environment for our motorists and our pedestrians. And the truth is, even you'll see on there that the majority of crashes are the results of driver behavior. But at the same time, we can work on our end to make sure that we're minimizing these instances where people might have to make a decision that is a poor decision. Um, Emergency response is the fourth E. I apologize. The So we'll talk about driver behavior being an important consideration, but there really is the four E's are critical, and so uh, I one of the areas of focus for us is work zone safety. Um, Unfortunately, we had a terrible incident yesterday in Pinellas County where we lost a sheriff's deputy at a work zone site. Um, and I just encourage you whenever you're uh, seeing whether there's somebody pulled over on the side of the road or if you're in a work zone, take those reduced speed signs very seriously because when you slow down, you can force others, and speed running through those work zones is really become a major issue for us. And so we can all do our part in making our roads safer. So with that, I want to make myself available for questions.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Brad, and really sorry to hear that tragedy. Yes, so definitely when we're driving on the road, we have to pay attention and slow down and maybe move to the inner lanes when there's something going on the side. So
Absolutely.
yeah, definitely. Brett, thank you so much. And also thank you so much for at the beginning, kind of give us a big picture about how the work at FDUT is organized on the different leadership. Um, all right, so now the floor is open for um, our attendees in the classroom as well as online. Just feel free if online you can unmute yourself and you can raise your question. Do we have any questions from classroom? Anything you want to know? Does not have to be about what Brad has talked about. It could be beyond. If anything you're interested in knowing about FDUT or about Brad's, experience going from where he was from the private sector now to the FDUT, I think he will. I'm not talking. Sorry, I should let you say, but I think it could be answer that question as well. So check.
I know we got questions out there.
Yeah.
One of the things that I know that a lot of folks have an interest in is, oh, we got one hand up. So I was going to create a question for myself, but I'll say that.
Dr. Ree?
Yeah. And thank you, your informative presentation. And I just noticed that you said the aggressive drivers and his behavior and just caused many as the perhaps caused many as in the crash in the Florida. And do you have and how about the funding about this the perspective?
I'm not sure I got the question entirely. Some is it about funding for safety?
Yes.
Yeah. So what's interesting is, and it gets back to the point I made about about the programs that we have, because there is a safety program. I don't know what the overall funding is of the safety program, but uh, what 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 we like to talk about is how we need to infuse safety in everything we do. So we don't do a project and then do safety outside of that project. Safety has to be part of that process. So a lot of the things we do, everything we do should have an eye towards safety. We've created safety, individual safety coordinators and champions in each one of our districts. So while we do have the set aside federal funding for safety, um, there's not a really good number that says, well, this is how much we spend on safety. Because like you think about when we do a resurfacing project, we'll do a 4R and we'll look at opportunities to create and to enhance safety and improve sidewalks and create ADA accessible bus stops. And there's safety infused in just our the most basic of our projects.
Right. So it's a essential component of any of those projects. And I think also actually Carter has worked with FDOT and helped to improve the pedestrian bicyclist safety for quite a long time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think what's kind of interesting, one of the things that comes up when we talk about safety is
Mm-hmm.
automated vehicles, the potential for automated vehicles. And I always think, you know, everybody seems to focus AVs on getting the steering wheel out and not having to drive. But the truth is, the technologies that are driving connected and automated vehicles are going to make are making our roads safer, and will continue to. As you see things, you're seeing the advanced driver assistance systems already, and just as standard in cars now. So lane assist and the adaptive cruise control and things like that.
Yes, yes. Lots of time, I think, crashes or incidents happen when something unexpected suddenly occur, right?
Yeah.
If we can have more predictability, more awareness of the environment with the, as we said, with driver connected vehicle, that could improve the situation.
And that's a great point, because even we even have folks doing predictive analytics that can tell you when the conditions on a roadway are starting to become conducive for an accident and where there's a higher risk. And ultimately, that leads us to the place where, okay, can we, from an operations standpoint, be proactive? And it may be from an enforcement standpoint with law enforcement, but it may also be changing signal timing and things like that to proactively slow down traffic and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's great opportunity there.
Yeah.
Technology, it can be leveraged for safety in many ways.
Yes, yes, totally agree. We have a question from classroom. Go ahead. Can you can you hear the student?
I can't.
Did you turn the microphone? Use this one.
Hi, can you hear me now?
I can.
Thank you for the informative presentation. My question is about safety too. We experience in Tampa a lot of congestion related to incident. So do you think there is a room to improve the traffic incident management in Tampa Bay area?
Yeah, there is. Getting into the operation side a little bit, which isn't my specialty for sure, but we do a lot of work in terms of incident management, and there are even new products out there that are geared towards, especially if you don't have an incident that's going to require an investigation or something like that you can kind of move things off the road and ensure um, uh, you know that you have a better flow of traffic. And there's even some things out there that people are exploring that will uh, reduce rubbernecking, and the ability of some you almost like putting up some visual barriers that will keep people from kind of peeking over and trying to see what's happening.
All right, we have Allison from Hillsborough MPO has a question regarding eVTOL, the urban air mobility. Allison, do you want to
Sure.
unmute yourself?
Hi, Mr. Thorburn. I'm with the Hillsborough TPO, and I hope this is not too off topic, but I was wondering, you talked a lot about electrification of the system and preparing the state for that, mostly for EV vehicles, but has the state been looking or working into the electric vehicle takeoff and landing vehicles and the vertiports, kind of the air taxis we've been talking about and hearing about, vertiports going up in Orlando and maybe Tampa?
Yeah, that's really,
Yeah.
it has gained a lot of attention lately, and I know you guys have done some studies in Tampa. Miami's become very active in this area, and obviously you've got Lilium in Central Florida.
Mm.
So at the central office level, our aviation office is in the second phase of a advanced air mobility study, and the first part of it was really an industry scan, kind of looking for the state of the industry and best practices. Our second phase of the study will involve more stakeholder engagement and partner engagement. So we're putting together that work group right now that's going to have various representatives. A lot of it is making sure that you have a statewide framework that helps guide the work and efforts of local governments. And so eVTOL or advanced air mobility, air taxis, it's really kind of interesting. Guys talk about the Gartner hype cycle, and you kind of go through the trough of disillusionment, and I feel like AVs are kind of coming out of that trough of disillusionment a little bit right now. I'm trying to figure out where the eVTOL is, because, usually something comes on board and you're, yeah, there's this great excitement, and then you go, okay, well, then that's going to be tempered by reality a little bit. I do think that maybe some of the expectations are a little bit high, but something to note is that, on the aviation space, they've been doing automation for some time, and they've also, the operating domain for these vehicles is going to be a lot simpler, and so it's something that may have the potential to move faster than even we've seen with the AVs.
Yeah, thank you. I just thought, is this the right time to build it into the scenario planning process that we were
Oh,
talking about, or maybe we're a little early?
I think it's a great idea.
Yeah.
I mean, you're on the MPO TPO side, and
Mhm.
you can, I don't know how long you've been doing it, but I do know that, back in 2015, 2016, when a lot of MPOs were updating their LRTPs, they missed uh, emerging mobility, TNCs, and things like were that immediately started to have an impact. And so it gets you back to that point. I love scenario planning. I think that that's something that we'll do more of, and we have to make some. It's hard to make assumptions about how fast technology will develop, and then also how fast people will actually adopt that technology. And it has somehow our planning process has to accommodate various scenarios of adoption and development.
Thank you for your insights. Really
That's
helpful.
great.
Yeah.
Allison, thank you for raising that question. That's also my question as well. But I think Brad gave us a really good answer. And I think, Allison, we are working on one project. I'll probably contact you later, and maybe you can serve on our advisory board. That's
Oh,
the impact of.
we're looking for people, so let me know.
Hey,
Yes.
Brad, I have a question too. Is there ever going to be a high-speed rail from Tampa to Orlando?
Well, that's a great question. Let me tell you where we are with that. Um, the the Bright Line is going to open up from Miami to Orlando next year. We have been working with Brightline on a lease of the I-4 corridor that would enable the connection between Orlando and Tampa. We have the framework for that lease all done. the alignment between Orlando International Airport and South Eye Drive or Disney was previously along the 417 corridor. The community kind of pushed back. Brightline, Universal, and some others got together and developed an alternative concept, which involves the development of a joint use corridor that would accommodate high-speed rail and commuter rail, an east-west corridor. That the department is working with the local partners to develop that concept and see where we can go with it. They are looking at just candidly, the concept they have is that they would be pursuing the FRA intercity passenger rail funds under IIJA, and it would be a significant request because that segment's going to be particularly expensive, and it would be a publicly owned corridor that Brightline would pay to access. In addition, Amtrak has availability of funding, and they've talked about enhancing their state corridors, which is a little more complicated process in terms of how that's funded and how you build the partnerships on it. But that's also out there, not necessarily high speed, but certainly enhanced intercity service.
So Brad, to follow up Zachary's question in terms of rail, I know previously FDOT negotiated with CSX to use their track to transport passengers. That was like quite several years ago. So has that already been out of the picture, or is that still could be an option?
We bought the CSX corridor for Sunrail. Amtrak has the ability to access the CSX track. And then I think, what we're hearing more and more of from CSX is maybe they don't want to sell, but they might provide passenger rail rights. So usually it's sort of split up between, you have freight rail rights and passenger rail rights. So I think in certain circumstances, you'll see maybe more of that where CSX may not want to sell it, but they may allow you to access it with a track fee as long as it's not impacting their ability to move freight. And if it is, then you start talking about infrastructure investments, and there may be funds available to do that, to add track and sidings, things like that.
Okay, great. Any other questions? So how about the ports? How about ports? Are there any big plan?
Well, on the port side, we finished dredging in Jacksonville. The port at Port Everglades in Fort Lauderdale had a dredging project that has seen significant cost escalation. So they're going to have to go back and change their authorization and assess whether it's still feasible. In Miami, they've got they're actually they've got an aggressive a net zero plan that's both enhancing capacity, but electrification and carbon reduction. And so there's some interesting things happening in Miami. Tampa's got a pretty aggressive program, and we've been funding a number of projects in Tampa and Manatee. What's kind of fun about the ports is that you've got 15 deep water seaports, and while they do compete with each other, they generally do complement. They have different types of cargo, they have different clients, and so it's fun. You'll be getting copper through the port of Panama City, and Jacksport's get the second largest auto processing port in the East Coast and things like that. So it just varies, and some are kind of serving that north-south trade lane like Miami, and some are east-west. We have the 10 closest ports to the Panama Canal on the east side, east of the Panama Canal. So that's a strategic opportunity for us.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, so it's very excited to hear so many kind of potentials and so many kind of potential projects for different modes of our transition. And I think Florida has a really strong transition system, and
Yeah.
that is very good for our economic development and for attracting talents to our state. If no more questions, I want to thank Brad again. Thank you so much for delivering this talk to us, and to it's very informative, and it gave us lots of information and also new thoughts. Thank you so much
Well,
for
thank
being
you.
here.
And we need to build the pipeline of our next generation of transportation professionals. And there's so
Mhm.
much to the world of transportation. Excited to see everybody here that's hopefully going to become leaders in our space.
Definitely, yeah. We're working on that.
Great.
Yeah. All right. For your information, so next week we will have Dr. Qing Lu from our CE department will give a talk, and he will talk about his research in the pavement design. So again, thank you so much, and hopefully see you next week. Thanks, Brad.
Thank you. Appreciate it.